camera's rolling. I like the danger in it. The heart pounds. It defies logic. It's thrilling to me.
You know, Conor McGregor has achieved such great heights, sometimes you forgot exactly how he got here. On the precipice of UFC 257 here at Morning Combat, we decided, let's take a trip back to see what he did to arrive at the place he's at today. Hello, everyone. My name is Luke Thomas. I'm one half of your hosting duo right here in the Bomb Shelter, the Morning Combat Studios. I'm from CBS Sports, as is my friend and yours, Brian Campbell. What's up?
Yeah, fired up. Look, fight weeks can give you different kinds of feels. This is a big one. It feels great. Two great light fights atop this card, but the story of how we got here is just as interesting for Conor McGregor. If we can get a couple of gigawatts together. I know it's not 1955, you know what I mean? You can buy them at a drive-through store, but we get back in that time machine, maybe fire up Jay Aaron's documentary.
No one cares about that.
And go
Unlike Conor McGregor fights, no one cares about that.
Go a little bit back in time on the road to UFC 257, how Conor got here. I'm fired up, Luke. Do you want to address the elephant in the room, though? People saying the whole idea of MK and production errors and debacles, they go together like peanut butter and jelly. They say the bit is getting old, guys. You know, it's too long.
Not a bit.
I just want to say that, you know, we know that. We're going to address that. But, you know, there's an eviction process. Right?
What can I do? It takes time to fix it. Let me just say one thing here. Please give the video a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button. Showtime has brought us here to the Bomb Shelter this week to really focus in on the content around UFC 257. As we indicated on one of the other videos we did, be back here on Saturday night, I guess Sunday morning, technically, if you're on the East Coast. As soon as that main event is over and both competitors speak to John Anik, we are, I guess, Joe Rogan. No, it'll be John Anik. Sorry, Rogan stays home. He doesn't go to Abu Dhabi. We are then going to go live right here. So this is your place for post-fight coverage, immediate post-fight coverage of UFC 257. We got it on lock, plus tons of other great stuff this week. Now, BC had this idea, and I really liked it. He was thinking to himself, you know, Conor is in this amazing place, but sometimes I think people get lost in the details about what he did to get here and what each little rung of the ladder meant, whether he climbed it or whether he fell a little bit, depending on how things have gone, because he has had crazy highs, he's had some crazy lows, he's had long time off. Let's retrace the steps, if we can, BC, to see exactly where he was and what it all means.
The guy has achieved such a, unprecedented amount of fame and success commercially, obviously, as well as some incredible things he's done in the cage, that it can cloud your perception, your reality. That's why Conor McGregor is so polarizing. It's like hearing a great rock song so many times on the radio, Luke, you tend to forget what made it great to begin with. So let's take a little bit of a step back here, get rational, and look at the Irish one.
All right, thumbs up on the video, hit subscribe. Let's begin, BC. We start with April 6th, 2013. Conor McGregor makes his UFC debut against Marcus Brimage. He wins at 107 inside the first round. It was a return to featherweight. Remember, his last fight in Cage Warriors was at lightweight, so he dropped back down. He got knockout of the night. What do you remember about that day?
I remember more about the buzz coming in, because when guys are either making their UFC debut and people have seen enough of them elsewhere, Cage Warriors for Conor McGregor, where they feel like they know something, like there's some expectations here, like this could be not the one, you know, not this ain't Luke Skywalker here, but this could potentially be somebody with future champion potential mixed with, you know, he can kind of sell himself well. I just remember people saying, like the same things I heard early John Jones, right? His UFC debut, like something special's coming. I don't think he could have had a better debut from that standpoint to live up both from the standpoint of the eye test, good-looking guy, knockout, everything he said he was, be brash. I mean, it was like a perfect inauguration there if you hadn't seen him before.
So maybe I'm misunderstanding your Jones part, because Jones came in something unheralded. He fought Andre Guzmão and no one really knew it. It was when he beat Stephan Bonner. Remember, he threw Stephan Bonner all over the octagon.
It's different, but the comparison is the same. I remember when people were first telling me, hey, did you see John Jones' first couple fights? This guy could really be, 10 years from now, the greatest thing we've ever seen. There was something like that for Conor.
For some reason, we're showing pictures of Khabib, which is absolutely the last thing that we need. That's fun. Here's my point. He had done well in Cage Warriors, and I remember, the thing I remember about this was I had not paid attention to what he had done in Cage Warriors. It wasn't on my radar at the based on all the work that I had to do. And I remember there was just this online buzz. You got to get McGregor to the UFC. Uncle Dana signed him. And so they signed him, and remember, he still had kind of a ragged haircut at the time. No, just the tattoos on his back, I believe. Oh, the chest piece that was not there yet. And he just pieced up Marcus, who was, the kind of fighter that somebody like Conor should fight upon his entry into the UFC. Made short work of him, as I mentioned, just 1 minute and 7 seconds, and then celebrated. And I remember, here's what I remember distinctly. I believe this aired on Fuel TV at the time, and Kenny Florian was the commentator, and I believe he was like, this is why everyone is so hyped on this guy. This is why the UFC signed him. And then he had that energy at the post-fight press conference. Dana, I think it was 60 or 70 G's at the time for the bonuses. He was asking for it. He just had a certain amount of charisma, did exactly what he was supposed to do, but obviously the best was him.
You felt in the cage early, both this debut and then, the first couple fights for Conor, that there was just a next level thing to the ease in which he was hitting people and how much they were being affected at featherweight by his power. I mean, it was quick, it was precise, it was a marksman, it was like shooting fish in a barrel. It was just so perfect that I didn't see strikers like that. I think that was the thing I took, even more than the brashness, the ability to light up a camera, just his ability. I mean, look, it was, that's his enduring, superpower, right? The accuracy, the power, the speed to pinpoint and hammer down the mark. I mean, it was special early on.
So I want to spend more time in the later parts of his career, but then his next contest, 17 of August 2013, so just a few months later, this time it was stateside. That first fight was in Stockholm, Sweden. This one was in Boston, Massachusetts. This was the card, BC, if you'll recall, Shogun versus Sonnen. This is when the UFC made their debut on the brand new FS1. That was the main event of the Shogun versus Sonnen. But I remember when Conor fought Max Holloway, they had, even though it was, I think technically on the prelims, certainly, let me pull that up to be sure, I want to get that wrong. Yeah, it was on the prelims on Fox Sports 1. They still, when they introduced Conor and brought him out, they lowered the lights for him. He did not have a standard walkout, and I know that riled up some folks, but it foretold that the UFC pretty early got on board with what he could potentially bring to their audience.
I don't think we had heard people give those type of interviews that are that bold. Like, what do we love about Khamzat Chimaev right now when he's in this, almost, is he perfect? Is he too perfect? Is there a flaw? Where's the flaw? Can I find it? Right. It's the fact that not only does he...
Or is there a bubble?
Yeah, not only does he do, incredible things for a guy so young in the cage, but then he gets on the mic and he's so matter-of-fact, confident, and he's bold, and he's funny. I mean, we hadn't seen that from a guy this early in his career for somebody like that. When he did the Holloway fight, it was the first time he had to go the distance, too. Right. So you knew Holloway had some bright potential. It's certainly a very young, unpolished version of Holloway. But to see Conor, really be the first time there a little bit. It was interesting.
Well, the key part of that was that he tore his ACL in this fight, and he still managed to win a decision. I remember when he tore his ACL, I was like, oh man, this is derailing him right at the moment that the ship is taking off. It hadn't reached orbit yet, but it was really pushing far. Here's the funny part about that. That fight took place in August of 2013. Remember, there were videos and photos of him meeting up with St. Pierre at that time, because St. Pierre had similar kinds of issues and was sort of a guiding presence in his life. Conor didn't stop doing media. He did not have a negative attitude. He stayed with it, and remember, he said, I'm going to come back from this faster than anyone's ever come back. Well, true to form, less than a year later, he returned against Diego Brandao, and this is one of the moments where Conor began to take off. Dublin, Ireland, the 19th of July, 2014, he earned a performance bonus for it, headlined the card. It was supposed to be McGregor versus Cole Miller. Cole Miller fell out, and they put in Diego Brandao. He won at 4:05 in the first round. This was not only, BC, a celebration of what Conor McGregor had become and what would become. It was an announcement of the what do you want to call it, the emergence of Irish MMA.
It really was. That crowd felt different. It felt freaking different through the TV screen. It was the first time I realized that looks this good in the cage, sounds that great on the mic. Oh, he has a giant potential following too. Like, this could really be a ridiculous marketing machine if he can put things together.
Now, the Diego Brandao fight did not last that long. Diego pushed him a little bit. What did you make of what you saw?
It felt like the Brimage fight part 2. It was like the sequel to the Brimage fight in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
It was just insane, savage accuracy. Just pinpoint doing exactly what he said. Every punch seemed to move and hurt and change Brandao, where you were just like, yeah, I need to see somebody take him down. I mean, whereas he had a little bit of trouble because of the injury against Holloway, the fight went to the ground at times. It was like a little bit different. This was back to, he said he's going to heal and recover and be the same. Oh, he's better. He took it up another notch, and that's really was the key to Conor all the way through his exit in 2016. He seemed, I mean, with the exception of the Nate Diaz one, which he redeemed right away, he seemed to get better each fight and do something a little bit more ridiculous.
Prior to that contest, prior to the Conor McGregor fight, he'd actually been knocked out by Dustin Poirier inside of a round. But before that, had some wins over Dennis Bermudez, Daniel Pineda, who's since returned to the organization. A 3-fight win streak and then lost to Dustin Poirier, again, filling in on relatively short notice. The thing I take away from that is the famous quote, "We are not here to take part, we are here to take over." And I remember thinking, because it wasn't just him on that card, if you actually go back to that card just a little bit here, BC, here's also who won on that card. Gunnar Nelson, who was this sort of adopted Irishman from Iceland, part of the SBG team. Ian McCall versus Brad Pickett, neither here nor there. Norman Park, he was from Northern Ireland, of course. You had Neil Seery defeating Phil Harris, Cathal Pendred defeating Mike King, and then Paddy Holohan opened the show against Josh Sampo, winning at 3:06 of the first round. Even Cathal Pendred getting a submission. It was just a celebration of the Irish that day, both the crowd, the sport, the community in there, and it told us that not just Irish MMA was on the rise, really all of European MMA, I think, was about to take off.
And it was a validation. This was one of the first times when Conor's making these bold claims that he's backing it up. I remember him specifically saying during that gap when he was out due to the injury that, come on, Dana, give me a chance, put me in Ireland. I'll show you how our fans can be. I'll show you how we can sell out the building. I'll show you how loud we can be. I think not only was his performance great, but the performance of the fans was almost validation for some of the things early on where Conor's calling his shot and he's backing it up. So I want to ask you this, Luke. He's not the first, confident, brashy guy we'd seen in combat sports, but sometimes that persona doesn't come, Floyd Mayweather's a great example, until there's a great amount of success, until you're savvy enough to put some things together. Have we ever seen an athlete in combat sports this early, which is why maybe the Muhammad Ali comparison started coming like way too early, where you're like, just stop with that. Mm-hmm. But just from the standpoint of being this freaking bold, I mean, it's one thing to be confident, it's one thing to call out an opponent, but in everything that he said, he had vision, and he was starting to call his shots early and back them up. We're not in full mystic mode, but we're starting to be like, holy shit, this guy's got plans. I mean, have you ever seen someone that early in their career seem like they've seen the future and they already know?
And I was waiting for him to stumble, and he just really never did. Not when I expected him to. I thought he'd stumble before, and he didn't. And then when he fought Nate Diaz, which we'll get to a little bit later, then he did. And I'm like, okay, well, we'll figure this out. But what's always amazed me about Conor now in retrospect, when you look back on his career a little bit, is that he is the way things are supposed to work. What do I mean by that? What I mean to say is a guy who knows how to promote himself, who understands what levers do you have to pull in the fight game to get ahead. Let me do those things. And then on top of it, a promotion just putting the wind at your back. Like, people always like, oh, Conor always got favors from the UFC. Yeah, but didn't it make sense for the UFC to do him favors?
Well, and to back that up, they also challenged him.
Sure.
And boy, did he take the challenge. I mean, yes. When Aldo falls out and he's willing to stay right on course, give me Mendes, give me whoever it is. I mean, they challenge him, he backs it up.
All right, but this is my point. To me, it was like Conor McGregor made it easy for them.
Yeah.
But he is one of the best promoted fighters I've ever seen, which is to say they gave him just the right adjustment each time to get good. And then eventually at some point you have to just earn your keep. You can't go backwards if you have a loss or something like that. But I just mean to say, this is the ease with which it is supposed to work. It's the blueprint.
On that note, when do you think was the moment or the fight when you first started hearing that social media backlash where people would say, oh, the C in UFC stands for Conor. Dana wants this guy to be champ so bad. They're going to do everything they can to make him a star. When do you think those things collided and you first started hearing it?
So definitely with this one you were hearing it, especially because he was headlining a card. He was coming off of injury. And again, remember, it wasn't like the Max Holloway fight. Yes, he won it plainly, but it wasn't like a blowout. And it wasn't even very exciting. Granted, he had the injury, but I'm just saying the last memory that fans had when they watched Conor against Max was, okay, you got a nice win before. And also, it should be noted, that was Max Holloway before he became the Max Holloway that we know today.
I mean, he's like 20 years old, 21.
Right. It's a win that has aged nicely, but it didn't mean the same things. So there was a lot of skepticism about, like, okay, you lowered the lights for him in Boston or wherever that was. Yeah, Boston. And then you give him his own card after being off all this time, and he got an opponent who came in on short notice. let's up the ante a little bit. So to answer your question, you started hearing it here, and this is where, to me, things begin to take a significant turn. His subsequent bout there, we now go to July 19th, BC, 2014. Excuse me, what am I saying? September 27th, 2014. So just a few months later, that was what was so impressive about this. He beats Brandao and immediately gets right back to work. He wins another Performance of the Night bonus at UFC 178 in Las Vegas, Nevada, when he TKOs Dustin Poirier.
And now the importance of this is it's a pay-per-view, and they put him on the poster. It's the third most important fight. It was Demetrius Johnson in the main event.
Correct.
It was Eddie Alvarez in the co-main.
Against Donald Cerrone.
Against Donald Cerrone. And this is now Conor, like, this was his opportunity from a standpoint, certainly of a platform. I mean, he already headlined a fight night card, but to be pushed from a marketing standpoint. But even more than that, it was a critical step up. Luke, would you agree that Brimage and young Max and, it was Brandao was a certain slide. Dustin was the next level up. I mean, Dustin was a legitimate, tough featherweight prospect. This might have been John Jones and Ryan Bader colliding, both unbeaten, but it had similar feels.
It's totally similar feels. I mean, a couple of points to this. Here's who was beneath Conor McGregor in the card order. This was about, underneath Conor and Dustin was Yoel Romero versus Tim Kennedy, a day that will live in infamy. Kat Zingano versus Amanda Nunes, and Kat Zingano won.
Yes.
I mean, can you believe that?
TKO'd her. She was getting beat up early, though.
I forget exactly how it went, but she TKO'd her. Dominic Cruz TKO Mizugaki. That's when he came back. Remember, it was a huge triumphant moment. How about Jorge Masvidal, James Krause, Stephen Thompson, Patrick Cote, Kevin Lee, and then Manvel Gambarian versus Cody Gibson. They were all underneath him. Okay, to your point, this was huge. I remember a meme that came out, and it was Conor McGregor on this train that was coming around the bend. And his head was like, they had sort of photoshopped his head on the front of the train. And standing over the tracks, and it was like at night, so like there was lights on the train. Standing on the tracks, you could see behind, it was supposed to be the silhouette of Dustin Poirier. Poirier was gonna be the guy that brought sense to the whole division.
Yes.
Understand, here's where Dustin Poirier was prior to this contest. He had been, as we all know, he had fought, I'm going to pull this up here. He had
beaten Max somewhat recently.
He had beaten Max at UFC 143. He did lose to Chan Sung Jung. That is true. Beat Jonathan Brookins. Had a decision loss to Cub Swanson that was, a thrilling affair, but then had gone on a 3-fight win streak. Had beaten Eric Koch, had beaten Diego Brandao, and then had just demolished Akira Corsani. And everyone was like, okay, this is going to be the guy that says, you cannot get past all that hype. Yes. That's great. This is
the first real test.
This is your first real test.
It doubles as a huge step up commercially, but in the main part about it, it's the first real test to the point where, because Poirier was on that little run that you mentioned, I remember thinking when this fight got signed, this is the first time I'm doubting Conor. This is the first time where this guy's a little bit too big. He can fight with you, he can brawl. We're going to find out a lot of things about Conor, but Luke, this has been a recurring theme now as we head into the rematch this weekend. I was watching the mental games he was playing. It was not long before I completely switched around my opinion heading into that fight and my pick, sensing that, God, he was getting in Poirier's head. I mean, that P-head stuff, like it was really, really starting to affect Dustin Poirier. And I started thinking, look, there's a great chance Poirier is going to take this personal, come out there looking to knock him out and get caught doing it. And that's certainly what happened.
Here's what's so funny. When the line opened, the betting lines opened when the fight was first announced, Dustin Poirier was a minus 225 favorite, Conor at plus 190. When the fight betting closed, so just prior to the fight taking place, Dustin Poirier became a plus 240 underdog. Wow. Conor at minus 225. To your point, the build-up to that fight had everyone, except maybe Dustin Poirier at that point, convinced Conor was absolutely living rent-free in his head. Now, even with that, though, were you expecting the result that we got?
Well, I said that those were the feels I started to get. So yeah, I knew that was in play. I knew it was possible. But then again, this is like what happens in all big Conor fights. Then you watch the ease and precision in which he did it and how he executed it, and you're like, holy crap, this guy might be even better than I thought. And that is a thing that kept happening right along with that other emotion of, am I watching fool's gold? Is no one just, can we get a wrestler in there to take him down? What can't somebody figure out that this guy's got obvious flaws? They just can't decode it. That thing was starting to happen too, along with believing in Conor because you're watching him do it with ease. But I also think this was the card that I remember the most where we first got the super aggressive Mystic Mac prediction. I mean, it was there before in smaller doses. Maybe it's just because this had so much of this fight took over the promotion for the pay-per-view, right? Like without a question, where you were so zoned in and this was also the last time before he was a superstar. And what I mean by that is UFC specifically, I was working at ESPN at the time, they sent Conor to ESPN for a day and did the full car wash, and that's the last and only time he did it. And do you remember when he did not show up for the UFC 200 press conference, the whole thing about flying from Iceland to Vegas for Nate Diaz, and eventually they pushed him to UFC 202? One of the comments he gave in the retirement rant was about ripping, like, what do you want me to do? Go in the woods of Connecticut? Like, Conor, he acted up. He did great in Bristol. He specifically went on the ESPN MMA live set. Phil Murphy was hosting, and Conor did like a spinning back kick. They did a fun segment. But that was the last time Conor acted like a regular fighter who still has to prove himself.
Great point.
From that point forward, and if you look back and rewatch the interview with Megan O'Leary that the two of them did, where Conor made the prediction of first round, you saw a changeover where he wasn't just confident anymore, Luke. He was stepping into the full armor of global superstar. Like, even though he hadn't gotten there yet, he was ready to get there right at that moment.
And this is when casuals were paying attention. This is when people were like, have you heard of this guy, Conor McGregor? He was, at that point, steadily, although I should say, more than, not incremental. I mean, it was going through the roof. Every month that would pass, there'd be a new sort of person. I remember the first time I knew Conor was, when was the first time you knew he was popular in the mainstream? I'll tell you what mine was, and you're going to laugh at this, but it wasn't so much that the numbers I saw him draw that were big. I guess that was part of it, but like when I knew it was really having an impact, there was an interview with Prince Hamed.
Yeah, Nassim Hamed, yeah.
Nassim Hamed, excuse me. And he had said, there's this Irish guy, he competes in MMA, he's doing what I did, blah, blah, but he was like very, very complimentary. It was not like, oh, he's taking
That's real, recognized as real. Right?
And I was, at that moment, I was like, dude, boxers and boxing fans don't like to talk nicely about MMA ever. And if doing it, it means someone is not just doing well, they have to be doing exceedingly well.
I mean, to be that brash, seriously, to be that brash, but to be able to back it up that dramatically, it's like Mike Tyson shit. Only Mike Tyson wasn't even always that brash, you know what I mean? I mean, it was so insanely brash, and then you're backing it up and you're using a boxing-friendly style. I mean, even though there's precision martial arts from a technical, expert side of it, if you're just a casual layman who the only thing you know about fights is what you see like in the hallway at your school or in the bar when you go out at night, McGregor's also giving you a very layman's, I'm going to set you up with that left hand, and the first time I land it flush, you're going to be knocked out just like I said you would. That's easy to understand. You're not having to figure out how somebody, grapple fucks on the ground, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is very, and he's white on top of it, and he's Irish. I mean, it was very easy to swallow for the mainstream. We know that.
No doubt about it. So he wins that one, and at that point, you were saying to yourself, okay, he didn't just beat Dustin Poirier. He iced him in, how long was it? A minute and 46 seconds. I mean, like, it was nothing. All right? So now you're like, he is beginning to get to the top of this division.
And he missed the punch. The big left that dropped Poirier and hurt him, it actually was a missed left cross, but he caught him with the elbow on the follow.
So I thought it was that the punch landed like kind of behind the ear.
It did, but if you watch the tape, it's more of the forearm and elbow area because it was a missed shot, and then of course he just destroyed him with those rockets.
Yeah, and also, that Dustin Poirier I don't think is as durable as the one today, which makes Saturday very interesting.
He's killing himself to cut weight back then.
For sure. And Conor was too, but Conor was the one in that particular case delivering the punishment. But that was a turning point. And now you're like, okay, it's fun to beat the Brimages, and it's fun to beat, again, that version of Max Holloway, which we didn't really know, especially when he had an injury. Now you are swimming in the deep end. But the UFC decided to give him a little bit of time to, I think, still work on his game. Here is my hunch. I believe that they made his next fight as a way that they knew he was on a rocket ship. They knew he could win his next fight, and they knew at that point there was no going back. They wanted to give him just a little bit more time to work on his skills.
So this was his John Jones, Vladimir Yadashenko, the damn janitor fight, right? This was his he's ready for the big time, but let's give him one more morsel. We'll do it. How smart is there? Seriously, you got to give Dana and them credit. How smart are they? They bring him to Boston.
They promoted him so well.
And they put him in there against another white guy, a tough guy in Siver, but a guy that's coming at him who he can beat. And they put Jose Aldo with the family in like the second row. Okay, that's how you've got your hero or your villain, depending on how you're looking at this, and here's his opponent. That is central casting to set the stage, and then McGregor's got to obviously follow through with it, and good God, did he freaking follow through with it.
So here's what you end up having. You had Dennis Siver. UFC Fight Night, McGregor versus Siver. This is on the 18th of January, a cold January in Boston, 2015. He wins at 154 of the second round. He gets a performance of the night bonus, his third in a row, and he just absolutely demolished him. It was never close, dropping him multiple times in this contest.
And I wanted to check in where Siver was coming in, just for the record.
Yeah.
He had a decision over Charles Rosa that he won the fight before. There was
Tough, scrappy guy, yeah.
There was a no contest with Gambarian. He had gotten knocked out by Cub Swanson before that, and he had 2 wins before that. So it's win-loss, no contest. You know, he's
Yes. So this is what this is where it got interesting for McGregor, because he gave fuel to his critics. His critics like, you just beat Dustin Poirier, you should be fighting someone much tougher, and they kind of dialed him back a little bit. But I think it was time to just, in the UFC's perspective, again, let's let his skill set mature a little bit. He's on his wrestling every single camp, blah, 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 blah. And then on top of it, let's really build him up as a star. This would be, in fact, the last time, if memory serves, BC, he would never go back to anything other than pay-per-view after this.
And he was already...
This was the end of free TV.
And by the way, he was a kind of already a pay-per-view star without having done it. He was like in that mold already, main eventing his final fight night.
You know, he's just, you cannot imagine a world in which he's not fighting on pay-per-view at this point.
All right, Luke, as great as the performance was, and every time he touched Siver, he hurt him, and you're just like, oh my God. Like, and the flip over the fence and the jump into Jose Aldo's face.
So that was the big takeaway from that.
The flip over the fence and the jump in Aldo's face was even more impressive and alarming and exciting. And I mean, it just created a ruckus in that moment of like, oh my God, this guy's for real. And not only does he want the champ, Aldo, but I mean, he is going to go out of his way to bang on that door and get it. I'll never, ever forget the fear in Mrs. Aldo's face. I mean, Jose, to his credit, was laughing.
Yeah,
but his wife and kids were like, what the F is going on? I mean, Luke, that is a ballsy moment right there.
Total self-belief, but I would disagree slightly. What it did was, when he beat Siver, people expected him to beat Siver. He was wide. In fact, what are the odds on this? I have to go back and look, but he was widely expected to beat Siver. The key to that was, if you were a fan and you saw him scream in Jose's face, you said to yourself all the things you just said. But it also enraged the people who were Jose Aldo diehards. Because remember, we're talking about the greatest featherweight of all time here.
Or the people who are predisposed to say, this guy's a great right hope. We've never seen him on his back.
Yep.
We've never seen him in adversity. I mean, look, there's a reason why the naysayers followed this rise and were that aggressive up to this point. They had a right to, Luke.
Conor closed that fight as a minus 940 favorite and Siver a plus 775. He was widely expected to win that contest. My point is this. If you were a Conor McGregor lover, you had something to take away from that, a certain reality. If you were a Conor McGregor hater, you also had a certain reality, and the two never mixed. I remember saying to myself, Conor lives in the most interesting space after that fight, because his critics think that he is an absolute fraud. Here he is fighting Dennis Siver, a fight he was widely expected to win, and now he's going to get a title shot from this. On the other hand, his critics think his supporters think he walks on water. And I remember someone tweeting me being like, dude, if you're a fighter, that's a great place to be. Isn't it? It's an amazing place to be.
Was this the pocket of time when people were saying, why are you not fighting Frankie Edgar? Why is he getting the pass to the title right now when he's this booming rocket ship? But again, we hadn't seen him on his back. We hadn't seen him face any adversity. I think the only
they had said, you fought Brimage, Holloway, Brandao, Poirier, and Siver. You've avoided all of the divisions.
And Edgar, for what it's worth, got screwed. There were windows where he should have gotten the fight, and he didn't. Let's talk about it's small, but the evolution of a fighter during this time. I think this was the first time he was really people forget, he was a little bit wild in the first two or three UFC fights. Now, 2 of them were quick finishes, but we're seeing spinny shit off the start of the fight. We're seeing a lot more open, sort of like multi-dimensions to the martial arts game. Around the Siver fight, he's really settling into left-handed seek and destroy guy. I mean, he can land a combination, he can do some things, but it is surgical precision. I'm looking at the spot, I'm getting closer, I'm there, and there really wasn't much variety to the game. But the confidence level, though, is just freaking blooming into something that's out of control.
There was times in previous fights where he would leave his own feet, like doing a jumping switch kick or something that would, no chance of it landing, high chance of you getting taken down from it. Kind of a bit wild, and you're right. This is when he began to really settle down. But okay, so he beats Dennis Siver in the most incredible fashion, and at that point, there was no going back, which brings us to a very important day in the same year. He fought in January against Dennis Siver. By July 11th, I think part of International Fight Week, if I recall, 2015, He has to fight Chad Mendes.
Well, hold on. He's supposed to fight Jose Aldo first. Jose, I want to ask you this at this point, okay? Because they did do one press conference.
But Jose, just to recall, this is when Aldo had that rib fracture.
Yes.
All the X-rays came out about it.
But before the rib fracture, they did a full tour, right? There was a full media tour, right?
That came afterwards, I believe.
So the whole favela thing, was that after?
I believe that was at UFC 194.
Okay, well, before Jose Aldo got hurt here, so we didn't see the results of the Mendes fight. Where were you sitting on believing that he's for real? Because you could have thought he was for real and still thought the great Jose Aldo was going to wreck him. I mean, heading into when I thought that first fight was going to happen, this International Fight Week, I remember thinking, I am in love, I'm intoxicated with everything McGregor, but Jose Aldo's going to kick his ass. He will expose him, he will be tougher than him, he will be everything.
By the time UFC 189, now I did not necessarily feel this way by 194, but at UFC 189, I definitely thought that was going to be a bad night for Conor McGregor. I thought, okay, dude, you've done a lot, but all of the criticisms that you haven't really fought anyone elite other than Dustin Poirier, you know, that matters. Like you do, like strength of schedule does in fact matter. And so this is where it's all going to come apart for him. So then I want to be clear about this. They fought in July, and it was mid to late June when Jose fell out. In fact, I want to say it was around on July 10th. White claimed that Aldo did not have a broken rib, as every X-ray said it was an old injury. You know, of course, Dana throwing him under the bus.
Backing it up right over the top.
June 23rd, it was the rib fracture, and then June 30th, it was confirmed he was out.
And the McGregor documentary cameras picked up the whole conversations of McGregor's at that giant house in Vegas that he rented.
Yep.
Lorenzo and Dana come over, they got it all on camera, and they are talking not as like promoter and fighter, they're talking as business partners almost in that point. I'm still sort of, not appalled, but blown away that they were, even though he was this rising marketable machine, they didn't know if he's going to beat Aldo. They didn't know how marketable he's going to be, and they are treating him like he's already been the champion of the world for 10 years.
Like he's the Conor McGregor of today.
Yeah, and it's wild to look back at the fact that we got to peek in and see what that was like.
Yeah.
But what's crazy about the fact that we both thought he was going to get pieced up at 189 by Aldo if the fight happened. It happened, and we still don't know what 194 could have looked like if he didn't get him out of there with one punch. You know what I mean? I mean, isn't that one of the great, crazy things about McGregor's rise? We still don't know if that version of Jose Aldo, if it didn't end in 15 seconds, that what could have happened next.
Well, I want to talk about that because this is the first time he's had a rematch of a fight he won. This is different than the Diaz fight, and that was at a weird weight class. We'll get to that when we get to it. But where was Chad Mendes heading into this contest? I want to bring this up. He had beaten Cody McKenzie, Yautsin Meza, Darren Elkins, Clay Guida, he had finished all of these guys. He decisioned Nick Lentz. Then he had the rematch with Jose Aldo at UFC 179, that 5-round absolute war.
And that's the best night of his life. He
put it on Jose Aldo.
He was great that night.
He did lose a decision, but that was fight of the year in many people's eyes. Then he comes back, and I was here for this one when he fought Ricardo Lamas. He fought him in Fairfax, Virginia. I was there cage side, knocked him out in 245, blistering KO, like it was nothing.
When Zombie main evented?
No, that was the main event.
That was the main event?
That was the main event. So that was, if you recall, I remember this, it was a 3 p.m. Fairfax card. And I was like, why are we doing this at 3 p.m.? Because it was football going on or something. I don't remember.
They didn't want to counter-program the Republican National Convention. So they were just
something like that. So anyway, he was hot, dude. Okay, you had the one loss against Aldo, but you fought your ass off, and then you came back and bodied Ricardo Lamas.
But he had the short camp, Luke.
Yeah, I know.
And if you're on the McGregor critical hater side, you still want to know. Well, with that version of Mendes with a full camp, the first legitimate wrestler that you know is going to take him down. And look, I'll give Mendes credit for the performance he did have on a short camp. But damn, I want to know what that fight would have looked like.
So anyway, Mendes goes in there, takes him down. I have to look up the stats. Takes him down several times. And underneath, Conor didn't, I remember saying at the time he had no guard. Turns out we learned later he had busted knees. He could barely move in the way he was supposed to.
Mendes was kind of shit-talking him, too. Mendes was like on him in that first round.
Yeah, well, again, we've gone back to it before. I've said it all this time on CBS Sports HQ this week. Only one of 2 first rounds he's ever lost in the UFC, and it was somebody who was like, you know what, just work with him a little bit. Two things I took away from that. One, at the time I didn't know it, but he didn't use a guard at all. He just kind of waited to stand when his time came. But it's been a lot of time underneath, so I was like, that's weird. I will say this, Mendes, he just came off bodying Ricardo Lamas with a heavy shot. He laid it on Conor several times, and dude, Conor has a rock chin.
And Conor got cut in that fight. I mean, he was he got mauled a bit. He got his hair got messed up. Somebody finally put it on him a little bit, but. When the seas started to turn, Luke,
yes,
you could feel it. Now, to
close, 4 of 7 takedowns for Chad Mendes. There was some discussion about like, could he take him down? Most people thought he could, but how often and what could he do with it? 4 of 7 he got.
And Conor did have moments, especially at the end of round 1. So what do you remember feeling between rounds? That can Mendes keep this up, or were you thinking that this is a bad night for Conor?
I thought it was going really well for Chad. And in many ways it was. But the thing about Conor is he is perseverant. Yeah. And the best about Conor is he just needs 1, maybe 2 punches to start getting people to think totally different about which way the fight is going. I don't mean people in the audience. I mean his actual competitor.
Yes.
And I'll never forget, he backed Chad up against that fence and hit him with that left, and he went crumbling. And I'm like, dude, everyone falls when this guy lands on him.
189, I wasn't there, but this fucking crowd, Luke, this is one of the all-time great crowds ever in one instant. And this was an emotional McGregor when he won it, Luke. So I want to ask you, first of all, he's winning the UFC interim title.
This was for the interim
So
title.
it's a big moment. He's in Las Vegas, which basically felt like Ireland through your TV screen. But he's like almost like crying, almost like, oh my God, I can't believe I did this. Do you think there was, for the first time, legitimate doubt in Conor's eyes that this wrestler was going to take him down, expose him, and ground and pound him? Or do you think it was just more the moment?
I absolutely thought that was going to. And again, I don't feel like after that fight, again, there's so many issues about the injuries and blah, 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 and ACLs this and that and the other. It's hard to know exactly what was what. But I did feel like when the fight was over, I'm like, well, the wrestlers could give this guy trouble. But then you knew it's like, Jose Aldo ain't that guy, and he just stood underneath Chad. I mean, the balls to take a fight on that kind of short notice from Chad Mendes, okay, that's one thing. What about Conor? What about Conor's willingness to take a fight on short notice and go up against that, and then to persevere given the change of an opponent and all the injuries you had, and then to wrap that title around your waist? Man, that's pretty damn impressive. He had real grit.
Oh, yeah. I mean, dude, that win was, I talked about his emotions. How about our emotions watching it? That win was super impressive, even if you had in the back of your mind, well, it was a short camp. I wonder what that would have looked like. Do you think the end was more of a stamina dump or more of just getting hit for Mendes?
Both. He was getting those, as Conor would say, teeps to the gut. The teeps to the gut. Those were draining him. The body shots were draining him. Conor does a really good job of just making you panic a little bit with some of the shots that he lands as well. So I thought that there was a lot of good to take. I mean, there's more good than bad to take from it, but I did think it fueled some of the criticisms.
And I think the good was the endurance. I mean, Conor endured a mini beating. He endured a tough fight, and he kind of persevered and figured out how to come around and rally to win it. And look, I mean, was he in deep peril in round 1? You can debate that, but it was a hurdle he had to clear,
right? Which
was great. Was this the fight where he had the crazy eyes on the scale when he like just barely made the weight, or was it the Aldo one? I think it was Mendes, right, where he had that sadistic, crazy look.
It was one of the two.
And he would look like Skeletor, and he looked like he was going to die on the scales, and he just made the weight. I don't remember him getting in Chad's head. Am I forgetting anything?
Well, Chad, remember, Team Alpha Male had a good relationship with him. Remember, Uriah Faber did?
Yeah.
And Chad came in so late, what could they really do? There was not a lot of... That was the same with the Diaz fight. Like, they had that presser, where we talked about making balloon animals and stuff. It's like, I'm sure that annoyed Diaz, but there just wasn't that pronounced amount of time to really do it, which brings us, BC, to the one where they did have plenty of time for it. Ultimately, they fought on the 12th of December, 2015. By the way, how good was this year for Conor McGregor? Beats Dennis Siver in January, beats Chad Mendes in July, and then beats Jose Aldo in December. Holy smokes, man, that's a great year for him.
How good was the co-main event on this night? Weidman Rockhold.
Oh, another good-ass
fight. Yeah.
Two guys who never recovered from that fight. But let's get to the point here. He KOs Aldo with one punch. I guess he followed it up with one punch in 13 seconds. I will never forget watching this. I'll give a shout out to Sean Sheehan, who's an Irish MMA reporter, and I remember he had tweeted just prior to the fight taking place, like right as they're about to go, takeover beginning,
Yeah.
And then when he drilled him 13 seconds later, he goes, takeover complete. And I was like, holy smokes. Dude, of all the ways I thought this saga, the Conor McGregor featherweight saga, of all the ways, if you told me he was going to win, no problem, because I understood how good Conor was at that point. I really respected him. 13 seconds. No one had done that to Jose Aldo before. No one's done it since.
And having been a big boxing fan, especially at that point, I thought it was going to be like every time there's a really good Ricky Hatton or somebody from the UK where you're just like, man, when they eventually come to Las Vegas and they eventually come into a real fight and face the world champion, a lot of times they come really close, but they come up short, right? You know, it's like almost like a lovable loser thing. Not only do we think he was over his head in this matchup against Aldo, but to win it the way he did, to come over the top like that. Luke, there are moments in sports that where like they're so alarming or shocking, or the gravity of it is just so much that like for a second life stops, and it's almost like you're floating above your body, trying to quickly think about how to frame it, right? Like Marquez knocking out Pacquiao that cold, right? Ronda Rousey getting head kicked by Holly Holm, where you're just like, oh my God. This moment in particular of doing it that quickly and that clean, you know, after all of these UFC big events, you'll get the, oh, that was fixed, it was obvious. This was one of those only times where I'm like, it was so shocking that I'm not even sure it wasn't fixed because it was so alarming in that moment. You talk about the internet exploding, Luke. It was like a change in the ozone or something where like an era ended and something else started, because I just could not believe that somebody could will themselves to do that. So I have to ask you, was it just bad timing, wrong punch, wrong time for Jose Aldo? Or Conor living not only in his brain, but like invading his full body in the build to that with the favelas and getting Jose that pissed off and stealing the title from him at the press conference and the inciting riots and all that basic Muhammad Ali stuff that he did on him. Was that 13 seconds the result of Jose Aldo for the first time getting owned to his soul by another man in maybe one of the greatest trolling build-up performances in sports history? Do you think that played into it?
I do. This is what we'll talk about when we get to it here at the end, about what makes this matchup with Dustin Poirier so unique for all those reasons. But you know, there was a lot of talk every single Conor fight about getting in his head for all the opponents, and I got kind of sick of it because I'm like, dude, on some level, you have to have the skills to win here, and these are pros, and they're kind of used to it. But this one was so, and I was in denial at the time, by the way. I should be very clear about that. I've come to realize that now that like there's just no way that you could go through that experience, an international tour to promote a fight in Canada, I think some in the United States, certainly in Brazil, and then ultimately in Ireland, where they had that presser, where you, to your point, stealing the belt, tearing the picture, annoying him, like, you know, touching him on set, and you know, who's the guy, Lance Stevens, who blows in LeBron's ear? Yeah,
Lance Stevenson,
just doing the Lance Stevens thing, just constantly on top of him, and then he comes in there, and Conor just splits his timing with one shot. It's like, you know, Jose had never really competed like that before. He had talked about how much he hated him. That was one of those moments where I was like, dude, this guy is just finding ways to orchestrate his future.
Did he get Jose Aldo so pissed that I know there was a little bit of a sequence before the finish. I mean, it went 13 seconds.
They bounced in and out a couple times.
But the first time they committed, was he biting down and throwing as hard as he could, going for the I'll show this kid, fuck you, I'm going to knock you out right here?
And the best part was he landed on Conor. If you actually watch the replay. He kind
of bruised him.
Yeah, he landed a nice shot on Conor, but Conor has a fucking rock chin and obviously got the better of the two.
All right, this was the first moment that we were introduced to not Mystic Mac, but the magic of Mayweather. Of McGregor, I'm sorry. I want to ask you, because a lot of people, they've heard me give these rants before, especially ahead of the Mayweather fight, where I'm like, okay, Conor's not going to win this. But I understand people getting seduced into thinking he might, because he's on this run of magic that we've never seen before. What's magic? I guess it's something surreal that can be activated by believing in yourself that much, and by your belief raising your talent level, Luke, to a performance that's seemingly above you. Him knocking out Jose Aldo with one punch was a performance we thought was otherworldly, above him. So I want to ask you if this magic was real. From this standpoint, Luke, I don't care where you think the source of it is. When Tim Tebow led the Broncos on all those comeback wins that one season into the playoffs,
Tebow time.
There was some weird magic in the air, true or false? I mean, he would suck for 3.5 quarters.
Yeah, it was unusual, yes.
He would suck the horn for 3.5 quarters, and then out of nowhere, he would like
Tebow time.
Make magical plays. Jeremy Lin with the Knicks for that 1 month and a half.
Yeah.
Was it like there was some divine hand just... He dropped like 42 on Kobe. I mean, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, he's hitting buzzer beaters.
So you're picking it out to a moment in time. I just feel like,
But listen, Jeremy Lin never did that again, Luke. Tim Tebow never did that again. I felt like the magic was real that night with Aldo. Is there any belief? And I know you don't believe in anything mystical or sorceral or spiritual or any... Luke, you're a dark-souled villain.
Ask the question.
But do you believe in this?
No, I don't. But I do believe that in any sport, there are years or seasons or months or weeks or nights where guys are just on fire. Dude, he was on fire through this. He was just in another complete dimension, totally dialed in, understood his opposition, understood the fight game, understood what it all meant, and just had a clarity. It just always had a clarity of purpose. He really, really did.
I mean,
And
does he slowing down the action like a great basketball player who knows where all the players on the floor are?
Conor's always had great vision. He's always had, people always talk about how fast he can set distance and how fast and accurate he is. He's always had really, really good vision. I still think it's only now people are coming around to like how good is the guy, because back then you're like, well, 13 seconds, it's a lucky shot. There was nothing lucky about it. It was all skill. But this is where the train got a little bit off the tracks.
He called it. He called specifically, he said, not only did he say first round knockout, he said the first time I touch his chin, he's going to be cold.
Yeah, it's a little bit coincidental if you ask me.
But it's ridiculous though, and this is why
It's amazing.
The analysis at that time stopped being about his actual X's and O's, and the magic started to be part of it, Luke. Is there a special narrative happening here that's just stupid?
Right, but this is where the narrative would come apart a little bit. UFC 196, the 5th of March in 2016. The fight would not go his way. He fought Nate Diaz.
It was supposed to be RDA.
Yeah, let me set it up here. He's supposed to fight Rafael dos Anjos. He gets injured and falls out. So Nate Diaz, who apparently was on a boat in Cabo.
And there were two opponents, by the way. Frankie Edgar was in the discussion for a little bit, but it came, per Uriah Faber, it came down to Faber and Diaz. And it was McGregor's choice. And according to Faber, they were close at doing it at like a catchweight, and it went to Diaz.
Okay, so it ultimately goes to Nate Diaz. They also promoted this as best they could at that UFC gym, and these two had hilarious back and forths. And then in that first round on the 5th of March in 2016, boy, he put it on Nate Diaz. I mean, he busted him up, dropped him several times.
The first 4 minutes of that first round was a dismantling.
The first 4 minutes was a 10-8.
Dude, first of all, the narrative had changed once Diaz became the opponent. Bigger, not going to fall for bullshit. Arguably a better brawler and fighter. You know what I mean? If it came down to it, not a seek and destroy one punch guy, but you're also like, what the hell's Conor going to look like at 170? This is so brash and bold. Luke, the first 4 minutes, he didn't just back it up. He was shitting. Oh, can we get Mayweather off the screen? He was shitting on top of Nate Diaz. I mean, he was kicking the shit out of him, Luke.
This is the second fight of the two, because Conor had the green trunks then. But I want to.
It was alarming.
Okay, but it also is, again, we want to talk about where their opponents were heading into this. Nate Diaz was not in a good place. He had lost to Benson Henderson. He'd been stopped by Josh Thompson. He had the win in the rematch or whatever it was with Gray Maynard.
When did he cut the promo on Conor?
So hold on, I'm getting to it. Then he had that terrible loss to Rafael dos Anjos where he was butting heads with the promotion. He'd been fined.
Yeah, he made like $4,000 for the fight. Yeah.
It was nothing. Then he beat Michael Johnson at the dos Anjos versus Cerrone 2 fight. And he pieced up Michael Johnson. And that's when he took the microphone and said, Conor McGregor, you're taking everything I worked for, MFer. Well, sure enough, Dos Anjos falls out, and now it becomes the opportunity for Nate Diaz. But there were a lot of people, like the odds, let me pull that up when it opened. Okay, when it opened, Conor McGregor, minus 300, Nate Diaz, plus 250. When it closed, Conor McGregor, minus 400, Nate Diaz, plus 400. They did not have faith he could win.
So that's interesting that the odds makers were that heavy. And I do remember, it was a big upset, not only because of the way it happened, but because of the odds. I still remember the hardcore, the critics, the hardcore media members, the people that really got in it, being like, no, I think Nate can do this. There was a lot of that in Vegas that week of like, this is a bad matchup for Conor McGregor, all things considered.
So
let's just, before we get into this, dude, how about, you said something on CBS Sports HQ this morning that I thought was a little bold. We were talking about, if McGregor wins here, he'll probably get it against Poirier in the rematch this weekend. He'll probably get a vacant title fight if Khabib doesn't come back. And you're like, after that, maybe he moves up to welterweight. And I'm just thinking at the moment, like, yeah, but there's like a historic group of lightweights here. And he wants Nate, and he wants Pacquiao, maybe not. But let's look back to where Conor was. He climbed that mountain so quickly at featherweight with one dynamic win after another. He one punches Jose Aldo. It's his division now in his era. And his first move is to move up and challenge for the lightweight title.
Right.
We went over that too quickly. That's ballsy as shit.
Super ballsy. His immediate move after winning the featherweight belt in 13 seconds was to try and claim the lightweight belt off a Dos Anjos who had just beaten Cerrone for the second time inside of a round. And I mean, you thought, okay, whatever. And then I remember I talked about this on one of my live chats. People had just forgotten it. Do you remember that press conference where he shows up looking like El Chapo?
Yes.
He just chewed up Dos Anjos. Dude, Conor McGregor could not be stopped, or so we thought at the time. I want to go back to the fight, though, 5th of March, very quickly, because we have to get through the rest of these fights. First round, he beat the fuck out of him, but at the end of that round, you could see Diaz landed a couple 1-2s and then pointed at him. Second round starts. Conor started, I think, okay at the first minute.
Okay, at the end of that first round, you saw a little bit of crumbling, but I remember the confidence was still so high. All right, McGregor will go back to the corner, he'll get a breath, he'll come back. it's seconds until Nate's going to go down, right? You figure like it's going to be a minute
How
here.
much more could he take?
I mean, Nate's blood. Was he bloody from both eyes? I mean, he was
fucked up.
He was fucked up. And when that momentum turned, that's why this was such an upset. This was such a moment. It broke the internet. I was in the media room covering the fight for ESPN. I specifically sat in the media room to get the interviews with the undercard people as they were coming off. Luke, I heard an eruption. This is the MGM Grand, so you know the media room is a floor up and over from the arena. I heard an eruption from the MGM Grand Arena that I just will never, ever, ever forget. And that's before the finish. The eruption was when the crowd realized Conor's gassing and Nate is coming on.
The moment that it began to be like, oh my God, Conor's in trouble. Nate was landing on him, but we knew Conor had a rock chin. It was when Conor shot. When he level changed and went for a shot and then you want to play the jiu-jitsu game tired with Nate Diaz. Boy, that's going to go very bad for you. Got the guillotine, flipped him over, got on top, was pounding him out, put in the rear naked choke, and you notice Conor barely, if at all, fights the hands. And I'm sitting there going, you gotta be fucking kidding me. And then stands up. And who had a more like screaming reaction than Joe Rogan? Do you remember Joe Rogan's call on that one? Oh my God! Like he could not believe what he was seeing.
How
He was
much did
speaking for
Nate
the rest
own
of
that
us.
moment? The famous pose. I'm
not surprised,
I mean,
motherfuckers.
he
Yeah.
owned that moment. Luke, that's a non-title bout at a catchweight, at a weight class that he's not even in. Yet I remember in that moment thinking like it was all over. The myth of McGregor was all over. In fact, I wrote a column for ESPN the next week saying if he doesn't run back that rematch right now at welterweight and get that win back, that's the only way to get the ghost back of what he just lost, because he was running from the Aldo fight on such a there's nothing he can't do thing, that was very humbling. And you talk about the growth of a fighter and how it plays into where he is now. He had to learn the hard way that moving up in weight doesn't just mean I can eat steaks and whatever I want to put on the weight.
Remember, he goes, we went from salads to steaks. That was the famous claim.
You know,
from John
he
Campbell.
learned a lot about professionalism in that. And Luke, the turning point moment where I knew he would potentially be okay was in the press conference afterwards. I don't know if you remember this, how much Conor McGregor learned how to lose. And he lost with so much humility and professionalism. And, you know, all credit to Nate. I learned a lesson. There was things I need to work on, and these are the things, and I will work on them, and I will be back. And I remember, you know, you just don't hear that. Seriously, you just don't hear that from somebody when it's, I mean, that's such, the internet freaking broke. That's such a damaging loss to this superhero thing he had built up.
And really transformed the career.
He gave it away. He gave that fight away.
And also transformed the career of Nate Diaz.
Yes.
Utterly turned his career around. He was very much considered to be the far lesser of the two Diaz brothers. And after that day, his career was never the same. So good for him on that. Now, it brings us, of course, I want to get through these because we still have got a bunch more to go
Luke,
here.
when you're making great content, though, when the painting is just coming together,
doesn't mean you should talk
you don't
forever.
care about somebody lost an ear. No.
It doesn't mean you should go forever. You should be parsimonious. Okay.
I don't think Picasso ever got blown because he didn't really get successful until after he was dead.
We're not Picasso.
Right?
We're doing a YouTube video that'll be forgotten in 3 days. All right. UFC 202 is the next one. As you indicated earlier, that was supposed to be UFC 200. They had their falling out. Conor did with UFC. But as a consistent theme here, by the way, is Conor gets bitter at UFC and then comes back. So that's another part of the story. But I want to talk about the fight. This was now the 20th of August of 2016, so just a few months after losing to Nate. This was also another fight of the night, by the way, nothing but fight of the nights.
Oh, this is like the fight of the year. This was.
What did you think of Diaz's chances? Because I want to say in the rematch, Diaz was still the underdog when it opened and closed, but just barely. Conor minus 125, Diaz plus 100.
Well, we learned a lot about Conor that was negative. We talked about the good, but we learned a lot negative for 196. He didn't have a great gas tank. He didn't have a remote gas tank. He didn't have a ability to know what to do when things are going south. Some people argue he still doesn't lose, to be honest with you. Some people argue that he's still a front runner who can't rally, even though he did nicely against Mendes there. I remember coming in thinking that if he can't figure that out, if he can't knock out a bigger man, a welterweight here in Diaz early, there's no chance he's not going to have a stamina dump and not going to lose this fight. I remember thinking Diaz has to be the favorite. The first fight, I think, sold above expectations. And I remember specifically the build to this rematch, Luke. You talk about Conor being a global superstar. This is the first time I was seeing like Tom Brady level celebrities flying in just for that, like taking the private jet in just for that fight. I mean, this was the biggest thing by far, but I remember thinking maybe Conor isn't the puncher that he thinks he is at this weight class. he might have to box. He may have to Floyd Mayweather. He may have to, use his feet and use defense and not think about seek and destroy, but think about preservation possibly, because Nate was eating up his punches, getting damage from it, but coming back.
And also, it was more than that. It was like, make 170 correctly. Think about how you want to execute in terms of your offense. And also, what is Nate Diaz bad at? Like, he didn't think about that before. Again, I talk about all the time on all of the breakdowns. I always do. There's a difference between the camps who are like, I'm going to do what I'm good at and just let the fight go the direction it goes, versus the ones who say, what are you bad at and what am I good at? I'm going to use that to take advantage of yours. The leg kicks. He went hard with the leg kicks, especially early in the match. It paid a huge dividend for him.
The difference between the second and first fight is he was dropping Nate this time.
Dropped him 3 times in the fight.
Alarmingly, where you're like, holy shit, he's got this. But to Nate's credit, especially, was it the end of the first when Nate really started to show life for the first time, or was it
I thought the first 2 rounds were pretty competitive, but the round 3, Nate Diaz landed 49 strikes.
So Conor's got
26.
And Conor's got a big stamina dump. And do you remember that moment where you thought it was over? I thought it was the first fight over again. Conor goes back to the fence. It was the end of the round. Yep. You're like, they might stop the fight between rounds. He's exhausted and he's getting beat up. Conor showed us so much here, Luke, because he needed to prove that he could fight for 5 rounds. He needed to prove that he could fight, that he couldn't be bullied, that he could come back from something.
Right.
That's why, we're still clinging to this fight when you stand up for the things that people say about McGregor, where you're like, well, hold on. Maybe it's just because you don't like him. Don't go overboard. Did you see the Nate Diaz rematch? The guy bit down and fought, but the pressure on him, Luke. I remember thinking, if you lose twice to Nate Diaz here,
you're fucked.
The ghost is gone. Like you can still be the featherweight champion. You can still be a star, but you have missed your window to Mayweather super global stardom.
Right.
And that's
You're
so
allowed
rare.
to stumble. You're not allowed a correction. And to your point, so he only landed 26 of 45 attempted strikes in the 3rd round, and then that 4th round, 46 of 76. That was a real bite down on the mouthpiece, gut check time, and he answered it to his credit.
And let's not forget one thing, Luke. This fight was a fucking war. Do you remember afterwards Dana White's like, I don't want to ever match. He said this that night. I don't want to ever match these 2 again because they're going to kill each other. These guys, he was starting to see his prized toy, McGregor, and he realized that this guy's a true fighter. He also realized that this guy's willing to go to that place in the right fight if someone's not taking him down. I think he got nervous there, Luke, okay?
All right, now it takes us to me, the most impressive I've ever been by him. Everyone's going to be different. Maybe you thought it was some other one, but this was the one for me when I was like, wow, man. I remember after the night at Madison Square Garden, November 12th, 2016, I was there for that. I'm sure you were as well. I remember thinking to myself, UFC 205, dude, if you're a Conor McGregor hater, and for a time I was very skeptical of him, where could you go now? He held the featherweight title. He beats Eddie Alvarez, which we'll talk about in just a second, to claim the lightweight title, the first UFC fighter to ever hold 2 belts at the same time. And I thought to myself, dude, if you are a Conor McGregor hater, there is no more refuge in the world. I remember I left that night and all of 7th Ave was closed because the Irish would not get out of the streets. The cops had to come and get them out of the street.
That was a special night. And it's not just that night. Conor McGregor had already established, Luke, that he's just this fun phenomenon where his fight week press conferences, we saw him and Nate throw water bottles at each other. His fight week press conferences and weigh-ins and stare-downs and all that shit was more fun than most people's fights. It was past that level. But I think he took things to an even deeper level at the UFC 205 at MSG Theater press conference. Do you remember this? The couple days before the fight, he shows up shirtless, very late.
This one?
Very late with the fur coat.
Yeah.
Eddie Alvarez is getting pissed.
His fur coat still had a tag on it.
They filled that with fans. Every single fan I felt was off the plane from Ireland. It was just full on McGregor. You could barely get your question off at media without them making fun of you and ripping you. And he did I apologize to nobody, but he did all that. I remember thinking in that time, because he dominated Eddie in that, but that's not Eddie's strong suit to fire back trash talk. I remember thinking we know now who this guy is, and he's great, but we know that he is trying to penetrate your soul with this head game shit. I didn't think anyone would fall for it anymore. There were some legitimate experts who were saying, no, Conor's moving up in weight, Eddie's a wrestler, and he can brawl and bang. He's going to put the brakes on Conor. He's going to slow him down, and he's going to beat him up. Luke, to this day, I cannot believe he snake charmed Eddie Alvarez, who, has a history of being an underground warrior. He'll brawl you at any time, but snake charmed him to basically get in his head, let's not wrestle, let's not go to your strength. I'm going to make you so mad that you want to come out and prove a lesson to me. And the same thing he did to Poirier, the same thing he did to Aldo. He fucking did it again, Luke.
Let me tell you where was Eddie Alvarez to this contest? So all the way back in 2011, he had that one loss to Michael Chandler. But after that, he beat Shinya Aoki, Patricky Freire. He beat Michael Chandler in a rematch. UFC debut, he didn't beat Donald Cerrone. He got leg kicked.
Good fight, though. Good fight.
Great fight. Then he beat Gilbert Melendez. It was a split decision, but then Melendez tested positive for PEDs. He fought Anthony Pettis, also not a great fight, but he won. But then he fought RDA back in July of 2016 and bodied him inside of a round. Now, we all know the truth.
Deathbed weight cut.
Deathbed weight cut, but still, Eddie did what he was supposed to do. And also, Eddie was extremely battle-tested at that point.
So that win legitimized Eddie, but did you still... We know Eddie's vulnerabilities. I mean, it's still the same thing today. You can get him into a fight, and if you can land it, you can knock him out. Do you remember thinking that vulnerability could be massive in this rematch, or were you thinking more about what his wrestling could do against him?
I definitely thought that if Eddie did not mix up his game, he would have problems, right? I definitely thought that. But I didn't. I thought he would mix up his game, right? Just strike with him for a little bit, maybe get tagged, but then, put the game where it needed to be put, or put the fight where it needed to be put. And he was made to look like an amateur. I've interviewed him about it. I'm sure you have as well. Called it the worst night of his professional experience, and then just gave all the credit to Conor. He just felt like he totally, he kind of took the training seriously as he always does, but just did not think. He just never anticipated a world where another man could do that to him, and he ran into it and did not know what to do by that time. And it was one of those moments where it's like, dude, what are you going to say about someone as experienced as Eddie Alvarez, who can wrestle, who can strike, who's fought all over the world, who's fought all of the best fighters of his generation? This was the guy you could not say was some kind of manufactured, the UFC's giving him some kind of gimme fight. Dude, there was nothing gimme about it.
How about that four-piece combination?
That sat him down.
I mean, it's just a thing of beauty, and he was never not controlling that fight. Do you remember being in the building?
Yeah.
I wasn't. I was doing interviews for ESPN right backstage, like right behind the curtain backstage when they come back, and that crowd in the Garden, it was one of the bigger explosions of all time in that main event. I mean, it might not have been Vegas for Mendes, but it was insane.
You know what was also interesting about it? It wasn't the 13-second Jose Aldo KO where you're like, was it lucky? Not lucky, but you didn't get a whole lot in there. Dude, he had a round, and then he had a chance to recover. And Conor never took his foot off the gas.
He regained the Aldo magic that was lost by the first Diaz fight, even though he saved face by winning the Diaz rematch.
Yep.
But it was still a war. He regained the magic, though, something I didn't know that was possible for him to kind of double down on the magic. Now he's a two-division champion holding up the belts, and you're like, he can pretty much do whatever he wants. And he's talking about getting stocks, and the pay-per-view numbers going through the roof. The second Nate fight set the record. He now had, at that point, 3 of the top 4 pay-per-views in UFC history. He was borderline walking on water. I mean, like, seriously, like he was at a point where so few guys, forget commercially, Luke, so few athletes can ever get it. It's a Mayweather point, really, which is why it began the road for them to fight each other, where commercially and critically, you are almost at all-time levels. You know what I mean? It's insane where he was at that moment.
And this is post-UFC sale. And so he was really looking for a bigger share. Obviously, he didn't get it, but I just don't, I remember thinking, dude, what could somebody who this whole time, it felt like, how when Biden got inaugurated, like all the QAnon morons, you're like, what are you going to say now? Like, the whole thing has come crumbling under. I remember that was such a validating victory. It really began to make you think about possibilities that just didn't even seem rational, including ones that I thought would never happen, but it did, which was before his return to MMA, he had a detour. You and I were both there for that as well. He fought Floyd Mayweather in a boxing match. I believe the specific date, if I'm not mistaken, 26th of August, 2017, T-Mobile Arena.
So right after the Alvarez fight, the drum starts banging. We're starting to get headlines.
Now he didn't know both
Well,
titles.
we're starting to get headlines at this Mayweather thing. They're both talking to each other. I specifically that January. So the Alvarez fight's in November. That January, it was like I was almost done with ESPN. I interviewed Floyd Mayweather. Came in to promote a Showtime fight Badu Jack was fighting. And that was right when it started, because I remember that was like the first line of questioning. Floyd, what about McGregor? A lot of people talking about this. Would you really box him? And that's where Floyd started with, I'm the biggest star in boxing, I'm the biggest star in MMA. I felt like from that moment on, it just exploded like something I've never seen. I mean, seriously, like the amount of people that were talking about it that have nothing to do with the fight game or the sporting world, or again, when you call up your mom and she's like, hey, what about this McGregor guy they're talking about? Is he really going to box? You're like,
my dad too. He's like, what's up with this Irishman?
I mean, it's crazy, and there's no need to rehash what we were feeling in that, but dude, that whole time it started getting crazy, we're all like, it's still not going to happen. Dana's still not going to allow it. They're going to go to court before you're going to see it happen. I still can't believe, to everyone's credit, including Showtime, which put on that pay-per-view, that they pulled it off. I mean, that 4-city press tour of the most, there were some low moments, but it was high moment-wise, Toronto and LA, it was performance art. It was rap battling. I still can't believe that those two stars were able to make something that bizarre happen that so many freaking people cared about, 4.5 million pay-per-view buys or whatever, and they went on this press tour in which, Luke, Toronto, they performed like it was, stand-up comedy.
It was
something.
a show.
It was a fucking
It was
show.
a real show.
It was insane.
I mean, this is what I mean. Conor tried to get, he played a little bit of the Icarus thing, trying to get the shares that UFC was never going to give to him. But if there was only one person, because I lived through Randy Couture trying to get to the fight on HDNet with Fedor, having to go to court, and it was an ugly battle, and I saw UFC go white knuckle with them, and I saw Bjorn Rebney go white knuckle with Eddie Alvarez. My whole modus operandi was promoters just don't allow this. But then if there was one guy who couldn't get the shares of the company, but if he could convince them to do something that they would ordinarily and had not ever even considered, of course it had to be McGregor. And to your point, I thought that the tour petered out a little bit around the Brooklyn stop.
No, it did peter out. It took a shit on itself. It
Yeah,
was bad.
and then the one in the UK was whatever.
all right,
It was a decent recovery, but the one in LA was interesting, and the one in Toronto was one of the more. I mean, Esther Lynn's photo of the two guys pointing at each other like this.
So good.
Just a moment that will live in fight sports truly forever.
And even Floyd, who was always a good trash talker, but never had somebody stand up to him. It was usually Floyd bullying the other guy in a trade. Like, remember, he was all over Oscar about everything. He had somebody who was better than him at it. Floyd did pretty well. I mean, he stood up.
Yep.
He stood up under that fire. I don't know if somebody was writing their jokes, but it was the most oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. What am I watching now? Oh shit moment. I mean, it was seriously a credit to both of those guys, and specifically Conor here, as we're talking about, where he has reached at that point, such a stupid level of celebrity, yet he was still able to put on the super, the cape and the costume and be even more than we thought he could be. And not in the fight, but in the build to making you believe. If you didn't know enough about combat sports, I think you can knock out that 42-year-old retired guy, right? I mean, it was.
And also, I mean, they're not exactly equivalent, but the Nate Diaz win over Conor and how it elevated Nate. Conor's loss to Floyd elevated Conor to be a strong. I mean, he was already a mainstream star, but in terms of how big of a mainstream star, because there's A-listers and there's B-listers, that put him at the very, very top of the list in terms of just overall awareness. And the fight itself, winning the first 3 rounds, blah, 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 kind of interesting.
4, and entertainment-wise, it lived up to it. I just want to go gun to your head, because we've heard so many different things.
By the way, that media tent was weird. I remember Carrot Top coming through, smelling like booze and cigarettes.
James Harden looked real high. There was the dude in the Sasquatch costume just walking around the arena with Jack Link's beef jerky. It was wild, but the most A-list crowd, by the way. Was that Mayweather Canelo? Was that Mayweather Pacquiao? This is Mayweather McGregor was the most A-list crowd of all time around that ring. But what's your couple years removed gun to your head? Did Floyd carry it late, or did Floyd say, let him shoot his load a little bit? Get tired, or was Floyd the entertainer going, I can't have this guy get knocked out in the first or second round. We have to make this seem legit so we can get a rematch.
Yeah, I tend to think that Floyd took it seriously enough to not be in terrible shape, and not much more than that. I know that pisses off MMA fans.
I mean, people in his camp have told, or connected to his camp, have told me he did not train at a normal boxing level. He got in shape, and that was kind of it. He knew what was going to happen. It was going to be easy.
It's going to be impossible for Conor to beat him in a boxing match at that stage, even as old as he was. It was not going to be possible.
I do remember the Fool's Gold, though, the 4 rounds, where you were like, is Floyd older than we think? And what is happening right now?
That's what makes it so interesting, because then Floyd marches, the tide turns, and then Floyd spends several rounds marching him down, laying into him, which, again, I've referenced it before. I'm sure Paul Malignaggi felt that was very validating for some of the things he had said. Again, I want to relitigate that. But in any case, I remember coming out of that, it's like Conor put on a hell of a show, the whole thing through. Floyd did as well. They made a ton of money. It was certainly much more entertaining for the fans than Mayweather versus Pacquiao. There's no denying that.
100%.
And I think people were feeling like it was dumb, but it was money well spent. You did not, when the fight was over, you did not think that was something that was a waste of your time. Yeah. And that was really the biggest win of it all.
And the hug from the two of them at the press conference right when it started.
Arm in arm,
showed those two bankers that they knew what they were doing. They did well. Well done.
We could get into a lot of the things that kept Conor out of the cage. I just want to stick to the resume if we can. So let's fast forward 2 more fights here. We finally get Conor after all the time off and being stripped and all the indiscretions. Again, everyone has gone over that a million times, but getting back to the fight, finally we get a moment to get Conor back. We go back to the 6th of October, 2018. I was there for that one as well. BC, I'm sure you were too.
229, baby.
Khabib Nurmagomedov. At the time, remember, where was Nurmagomedov heading into this fight? So before the Conor McGregor fight, He was doing the things he always does, which is beating the fuck out of everyone.
He's telling Michael Johnson to quit, at 205, but
right, but the last 4 of these before that were Al Quinta. He beat him at UFC 223. Again, late notice thing, the whole thing there. He beat the shit out of Edson Barboza.
That was a freaking beat down.
He beat Michael Johnson. He beat the fuck out of Daryl Horcher. He beat Rafael Dos Anjos. He beat Pat Healy.
It
goes on and on and on. Undefeated then, undefeated now. Going into this contest, him and Conor had the ugliest press conference I'd ever seen in MMA history.
Yes.
Tito and Ken was pretty bad,
I was there. There was the most amount of police presence I have ever seen for an event. Maybe you saw more for the inauguration when you went to the airport the other day. But at Radio City Music Hall, no fans, just media. It was serious. It was some serious because of the whole situation with the bus and all that, and the dolly. There was some. I mean, you can't underscore. Obviously, the fight played out. It broke the pay-per-view records. It's the biggest event in MMA history. It's among the biggest combat. Maybe Dana still thinks it's the biggest combat sports event of all time, because of financials and numbers. But Luke, you can just not underscore that this was like the perfect fight at the perfect time. It was almost Ali Frazier 1, where the champion who never lost his belt was coming back against the unbeaten champion who's destroying everybody. And there's hatred, and it's like number 1 and 2 or 2 and 3 in the pound for pound. I mean, it was just like. God damn, it was the perfect storm. Mayweather McGregor was the perfect storm, and other reasons for legitimate fights, 229, the build, it was just something. Luke, I'm not sure we'll ever see that again. Maybe unless they fight each other a second time.
Well, I hope we don't see it again in terms of the. He was making fun of his wife on social media for their sort of the devout Muslim practices, which is never really all that great. So there was a dark energy about this whole fight, but it was big, and you couldn't believe it.
And it carried over, by the way, from the dark energy I thought Conor showed in the Eddie Alvarez build for the first time. Maybe not dark, but the first of I'm not necessarily doing this just to get in my opponent's head. I also believe in the smell of my own shit now, and my shit's great. And I'm just gonna be like, fuck you, I don't care, and I'm gonna show up to the press conference an hour late, and I'm just gonna do whatever I want. That was still there against Mayweather, but it was fun. This was dark as shit. I mean, this was.
This one really turned ugly. There was no with Mayweather, it eventually turned pleasant, and with Eddie, he sort of faded away.
He was rabid at the press conference. The Khabib one at Radio City. He was like a rabid dog.
Uncontrollable. Yeah. People thought he was drunk or high or something. But by the time the fight came around, and he was, by the way, there were still, I think, New York Times reports about potential legal trouble that he was in related to sexual assault and everything else. So finally, when the first round comes around, Khabib has a little bit of trouble early, but eventually takes him down. And then in the second round, proceeded to beat the fuck out of him.
He dropped him with that right hand.
I couldn't believe it. I was like, dude, Conor is in deep fucking trouble.
And I did pick Conor to win, and I did believe in the magic. I thought it was still there. I think if there's any validation of my bad pick, when all the other experts were saying, dude, come on, this is the worst possible style matchup for Conor.
Right.
Khabib's going to smash him. He's going to do exactly what he said he did. And I'm like, Khabib should do what he says he does. And even though I think Khabib is the least likely to fall prey to the mental games that the other guys have, we're just talking about freaking magic here. We're talking about a guy who still can be lined up if Khabib's going to shoot in to land the big shot. I think if there's any redemnity, is that a word?
No.
The plural of redeemed, redemnity?
Redemption.
If there's any temerity to what I'm saying here, Luke,
That's not the word either.
Is that Conor afterwards was pretty honest in saying, yeah, I was in shape, but I wasn't listening to coaches. I was sparring too much. He basically said without saying I was doing white lightning. Luke, you admit it. Was he basically saying without saying that I'm partying and drinking whiskey?
More or less.
And maybe doing cocaine?
This is why people are like, how could he be so calm at today's press conference? And I'm saying to myself, he took the road that he was on as far as he could take it. And it was time for a reset. And this loss was one of those moments where he was like, okay, it probably is time for some kind of a reset, which is why he is so convinced that he can beat Nurmagomedov, because all the things. He had wrung the sponge dry, and it was time for a new paradigm, a new way of thinking, a new way of acting, a new way of being committed to the craft.
Sports. Nice pun there.
Yeah, exactly. No play. Look, he's got Tom Ford on the fucking lenses. Supposed to scrape that off, guy. That's him right after the loss. Look at that. Look at that face. Right after Nurmagomedov wins, he just felt fucking awful.
All right,
probably.
Tell us the truth. Was he pleading for Khabib to not beat him up? What was that moment? What was it?
Maybe.
It looks bad. I gotta think Khabib's right here. I mean, the guy was telling him look.
It wouldn't matter either way. Khabib was going to fucking step on the gas here, and then of course Khabib wins, and then there's a melee afterwards because Khabib after Dylan Dennis. But I remember the one part I wanted to talk about was they eventually got it under control. I was in the back room, in the media room, when Khabib came back and said, listen, I apologize to the commission, I apologize to UFC, But how is it this guy can insult my culture, insult my religion, insult my family, and nothing happens, but I'm the criminal if I jump out of the cage? And then he didn't take any questions and he left. And I remember thinking, well, Conor, you wanted to get into someone's head. Congratulations, you did. Here's the problem. It backfired. Holy fuck.
Well, here's the
he
problem.
got in Khabib's head.
Look, there's two kinds of people. There's the people you can get in their head and break in whatever activity you're doing. I've played a lot of basketball in my life. I've always, in some cases, overcame the lack of athletic ability and skill with just being a maniac. There were times, depending on the level of play, where I'm trying to get into people's head. You find out quickly that there are people that you can get to play a little bit angry or aggressive to your advantage by getting in their head, and there are people that are like, fuck you, I'm going to score every single point the rest of this game in your face, and then I'm going to be willing to fight you afterwards just for trying to show me up. And he found the guy who was going to do that, where it got dark, it got ugly, and it's an interesting point by Khabib. He also mentioned, my dad's going to smash me for this. He's going to kick my ass. My dad is absolutely going to,
Dad's not going to be happy about this one, certainly. But I just remember, I remember thinking, like, Conor's coming undone. Like, whatever he was doing to get that magic, to get to this point, it's not working anymore. The game is, I honestly thought that the game, I mean, Khabib is special, but I thought that, like, you know, did Conor get lucky? No, but sort of the winds of fortune were at his back a little bit, and I thought that had been, all that oxygen was gone.
Yeah, you stopped doing the little things. And now that you know it, and I know some people are saying, oh, that's a nice excuse to give after the fact. But
I still think Khabib beats him a second time.
I think it's obvious that when you go back and watch the press conference and the interviews, that was a guy that was just, it was in a maniacal place where the stardom was so high, the whiskey business is blowing up. He made so much money against Floyd. He didn't get any jail time for the Dolly thing. He's got these knocking out people in bars. There's all this other shit going on, and he thought that it didn't matter because when I say it's go time, I can still go in my business. And he met an all-time freaking great. You know, he met a guy who was in the GOAT conversation, and he wasn't having it. And to Khabib's credit, he not only outlasted him, he did what he said he did. And for one round, he actually tried to knock out McGregor on the feet and knocked him down and beat him up. I mean,
Conor had his moment in the third round.
Won a round?
Deserves to be acknowledged, but by the fourth, there was no stopping Khabib. He was an animal possessed that night as well, and certainly one of the best fighters we've ever seen in the sport, one of the most unique as well. And then there would be, BC, a nearly 2-year absence, not quite, but it brings us to 18 January 2020, the only fight he had, and it was only 40 seconds. This was the first time, here he is right here, a renewed Conor McGregor, where he did not trash talk Donald Cerrone. He was confident. He was certainly a guy in command. He was at 170 pounds, so you can see he's less cut, but he's certainly bigger.
Yeah, is that bullshit in hindsight that Dana's just like, hey, who cares? It's a lightweight fight. It just happens to be contested at 170. Nobody else gets that kind of
I hate that shit. But anyway, you can see the fight here. Conor, though, this is what was so interesting to me about this fight, is that I was like, God, is he like totally demure at this point? Who is he? Has he forgotten his edge? And then he came out there, and from the moment the bell rang, he went zooming across the octagon and did not give Cerrone one fucking ounce. And I thought to myself, dude, if he can be that kind and fight like that kind of a ferocious animal, wow, there might be some life left in this guy.
And saying all the right things, talking about wanting to stay active and come back and do, and I mean, look, we found out that through the DMs with Dana that he was still trying to do somewhat bullshit fights. He was trying to do a Diego Sanchez fight. That doesn't have the same, screaming volume as I'm coming back against Dustin Poirier does right now. So, maybe the break in the COVID was a good thing in that regard, but that 40 seconds, it's hard. Just the 13 seconds against Aldo. We don't really know the true story. We don't really know if he was really that much better than Jose Aldo. We don't know what that fight would have looked like. We don't know if that 40 seconds was that way because Donald Cerrone laid an egg in a big moment and he was a little bit washy, or if everything we think we saw, which was the variety to Conor's game, the confidence, the speed, the explosiveness, and the will, the readiness to finish you. That's the intrigue heading into this rematch, Luke. That tells the full story of who Conor McGregor was, where he went, and he's back, what happened to him along the way, the lessons he learned. I feel heading into this rematch with Poirier that if it's time to get drunk again on the juice, maybe not the full magic, right? But the drunk again on the juice of, for all the polarizing things surrounding him, let's not underrate his actual ability to do what he does when he is 100% ready. He's not too old yet. He's 32.
Yeah.
The last few years have been wild, but he hasn't been taking the damage, okay? Right. So it's not out of play. And by the way, if he wins this, it's a tip of the cap, but it's not out of play that he triggers and kickstarts a second elite run to his career, which, Luke, that would really We don't know what it's going to look like.
Right.
But he's got the potential to really add himself to the all-time discussion here.
And of course, where was Cerrone prior to the McGregor fight? We've been doing that, so it's worth bringing it up here. He had wins in 2019, over January 19th of 2019, over Hernandez. Then in May, he fought Al Iaquinta, won them both. But then he fought Tony Ferguson. He got stopped. He fought Justin Gaethje. He got stopped. And then Conor McGregor was his 5th fight in the calendar year after fighting 4 different hammers. You know,
I mean, they were elite knockouts, but he was coming in off of 2 straight knockouts.
And then the Gaethje one was bad. It lasted inside of a round. So there's a question about that. But also, Conor did everything he was supposed to do, and then some. But then, of course, he had battles with the UFC. He had a year off. He had this, he had that, which brings us, BC, as I close this now, UFC 257, this Saturday. Donald Cerrone,
We just painted
Dustin
a
Poirier.
masterpiece right there, right?
Yeah, here, let's go. This is the one thing that stands out to me about this fight, BC. We talk about the second chapter of Conor. The first one was all about if he got the loss, he wanted it back right away. Like, I want to get it back. And I'm going to go from one big challenge to the next big challenge. Now he's taking a more considered approach. 6 years between, almost 7 years between fights, which is the way rematches should be. They should not be immediate unless a judge or a referee fucks something up.
They should be like Tito and Chuck 3, right? Let's wait till they can't fucking walk anymore.
Okay, there's obvious descriptions in that say, but these are guys in their prime. I think we can all both agree they're in their prime. And it's a rematch Conor is taking, having beaten one of those guys along that screaming run he was on. Can you do it again when that run is over and you've had to pivot to this new stage in his career? I find that idea fascinating. What is the big thing about this fight that you sort of it's on your mind?
It's that we know that Poirier's better. We know that
this was from today's presser.
We know that there is a potential bad ending for Conor in this fight. There's a hell in rounds 3 through 5 if we get there, where if you don't have the right changes to your game and the adaptions, that you're going to be in there with the wrong guy who can fight you and do different and have a variety in what he's doing, which is Poirier. But I want to see what this time has done to Conor. This ain't no money fight against an old guy or against a guy at the wrong weight class. And if Conor wanted to be a celebrity fighter the rest of the way and take really large paydays for fights that are Mayweather-like controlled with the promotion, where yes, I'm fighting the right guy, but maybe I'm fighting him at the wrong time or the wrong weight. No, this is
Canelo a little early, Cotto a little late.
This is I'm going in there. Now look, rightfully maybe the betting favorite. Yes, he did something 6 years ago. Yes, it's still possible that he does that again. But the biggest intrigue still for me is, what does 2021 Conor McGregor look like with just 2 fights in the past 4.5 years? This sport changes so damn quickly. You need to be changing with the times and evolving. His plan A is still pretty awesome. What happens if plan A takes him to round 3 and round 4? Where are we going to be in that?
It's interesting. Is this going to be the first Diaz fight, or is this going to be the Eddie Alvarez fight? Here's what I mean, right? If you think of, he loses in 2018 to Khabib and he makes this pivot, okay? And then his first fight back is against Cerrone, and like Aldo, couldn't last a minute. After that, is he going to get? Did the pivot work? Was he able to fully change gears, become an adult, an older man, a father, a businessman? Get rid of the demons that were plaguing him. Do the right thing. And was that 40 seconds somebody who can then take that and go and beat the very best like Eddie Alvarez, or is it just going to be more of somebody just walking into things and the magic is a little bit gone? I think Dustin Poirier, 6 years after the first one, is going to be a great test for us to see exactly, did Conor make that pivot from Clown Prince to King of MMA in a full-throated way?
The way that Dan Hooker fought in that 5-round loss to Dustin Poirier came as close as you could to beat this, super elite version by playing Dustin's game and striking. I just feel like Hooker, compared to the Conor that we think we're getting, is like a little bit too evolved, better technically, some other things. I don't know if Conor can do that performance. I don't know if Conor can have a Nate Diaz 2 against this version of Dustin Poirier and win. That's the thing. I mean, that's why you're getting really good odds, by the way. If you're looking at McGregor by decision, you're seeing plus 600. You're seeing some crazy wide. It's not likely, certainly, for that. But what's going to happen if we get to rounds 4 and 5 and Conor's in this fight? That's where it's going to get white knuckle. It's going to be insane.
Yeah, and by the way, if the fight ends in 13 seconds, to me, that's going to be evidence he made the pivot. You don't put away, no one puts away Dustin Poirier in 30 seconds or whatever it is, inside 60, let's say, by accident.
Let's say he did.
It does not happen.
Let's say he did. Where would this win fit in right now? I mean, nothing's going to beat the Aldo win, right?
Yeah, and the Alvarez win is pretty goddamn special, too.
Okay.
But it would be right behind that, if you ask me. You have someone battle-tested, still in their prime. You waited a long time before you gave them a rematch. That, to me, would signal something pretty special if you could do that. In terms of not the win where he's going to sell the most pay-per-views, which ones validated him as a competitor.
Yes.
The Aldo wins, the Alvarez wins. Those are the ones you look back and you're like, dude, what could you say about it? There's no lucky draw there. So that was a retrospective on the career of Conor McGregor. Certainly we skipped the Cage Warriors part, but from the moment we saw him in 2013 against Marcus Brimage until Saturday. We hope you really enjoyed it. Please give the video a thumbs up, hit subscribe. Reminder, be back here Saturday night as soon as the fights are over. BC and I are going to take care of you with a live show right here from the bunker to celebrate, to weep, to moan, to high five, to do everything in between when the results of UFC 257 come in the book.
We're going to have room service diaries, so get ready for that. If we're not fired by Sunday, we may have another surprise for you. It's just going to be so much content, wall to wall. And look forward to our next edition of Deep Dive on an Opponent's Career when we go through the Betch Correa story. That should be fun.
Yeah, we'll never do that. Okay, thumbs up on the video, hit subscribe. For everyone at Showtime, Malka, CBS Sports, that's Brian Campbell. I'm Luke Thomas. Peace.
When the camera's rolling, I like the danger in it. The heart pounds. It defies logic. It's thrilling to me.